The Disney Renaissance is one of the most beloved periods in animated film history. It started with The Little Mermaid in 1989 and ended with Tarzan in 1999, spanning 10 films. The Disney Renaissance is credited with saving Disney as a studio. After the commercial failure of the Black Cauldron in 1985, Disney decided to return to form with colorful fairy tale-based musicals. This recemented Disney's dominance when Studio Ghibli was producing spectacles like Grave of the Fireflies and My Neighbor Totoro. Today, we're addressing the Renaissance from a unique angle, historical accuracy, by putting them in timeline order. Yo, I'm Brad with Wicked Binge, and this is the Disney Renaissance Timeline. Hercules, Ancient Greece. This 1997 film is based on Greek mythology and set in ancient Greece. There are two eras of ancient Greece that Hercules might be set in, the Mycenaean Age and Classical Greece. The Mycenaean Age lasted from 1750 BC to 1400 BC. The myths Hercules is based on are set during this era in 1200 BC. The source material being set in this time period provides a compelling argument for Hercules being set here. Mycenaean pottery shown in Hercules is further evidence. During Zero to Hero, the film shows Hercules being painted on vases. And the vases are from the Mycenaean period. They're called stirrup jars because the handle represents a double stirrup. In later eras of Greek history, the bowls become shallower, but in Zero to Hero, the vases are elongated. Also elongated is the vase the muses are painted on. During the opening narration, it shows a collection of ancient Greek artifacts, including the muses vase. This is elongated with extra thick handles. However, an argument can be made that Hercules is set in Classical Greece. Classical Greece is a period between the Persian Wars in the early 5th century BC and the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BC, 1,000 years after Mycenaean Greece. This is when the myths of Hercules were written. The architecture also matches Classical Greece more than Mycenaean. Classical Greek architecture focused on symmetry to appease the gods. This symmetry is present across the film, including the Temple of Zeus, where Hercules meets his father. The spires Hercules knocks over are closely connected to Classical Greece because domes and arches were commonplace during this era. Their smooth, rounded exterior shows architectural development since the Mycenaean period. Extra evidence for Classical Greece is the characters' clothing. Many characters, including Megara and young Hercules, wear a chiton, an ancient Greek sleeveless shirt. The chiton drapes around the body and fastens at the shoulder. It wasn't popular until the Archaic period, centuries after the Mycenaean period. Hercules could be set during either Mycenaean Greece or Classical Greece, with valid arguments both ways. Overall, this doesn't impact the placement of Hercules on the timeline, as it still occurs many centuries before our next entry. Aladdin, 750 AD. Placing Aladdin on a timeline is convoluted and has spawned multiple fan theories. The film was based on an Arabian fable, also called Aladdin. It first appeared in a story collection called Arabian Nights. The original Arabian Nights was written around 750 AD and includes oral tales such as Sinbad the Sailor and Ali Baba. There is an argument that Aladdin, the Disney film, takes place when its source material is set.
Where did you say you were from?
Most other Disney Renaissance films also take place when their source material does, creating a continuity if this is the case. However, Aladdin contains a variety of continuity errors that contradict this setting. Two of these are during A Whole New World. Aladdin and Jasmine's magic carpet ride passes by the Sphinx being built. The Sphinx was built in 26th century BC, challenging the 750 AD setting. It also shows colored fireworks during their stop in Beijing. Colored fireworks weren't invented until the early 1400s. Fireworks before then were bamboo hollowed out and filled with gunpowder. So, if Aladdin was set in 750 AD, the fireworks would be gray, not colored. Another error is costumes.
Ooh, I like it muy macho.
Jasmine's midriff and exposed hair would not be considered appropriate for royalty. In 750 AD, she would wear loose-fitting modest clothes and a veil. The live-action remake of Aladdin provides a more accurate depiction of Jasmine's outfit, without completely redoing the original. Genie also creates many continuity issues. Genie is among Disney's most beloved characters, and he perfectly embodies the charm of his voice actor, Robin Williams. Part of this embodiment is Genie's pop culture references. They were designed to convey Williams' ability to adapt his voice for impressions, showing audiences the character's unique appeal.
All right, let's make some magic!
Genie impersonates many famous figures, including Jack Nicholson, Robert De Niro, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Genie also plays Stars and Stripes Forever at one point as a one-man band. But when Genie first emerges from the lamp, he states that 10,000 years gives you such a crick in the neck. For Genie to have this pop culture knowledge and have been in the lamp for 10,000 years, Aladdin must occur in the future. That logic is the basis for a popular fan theory. The fan theory suggests that Aladdin is set in the distant future after nuclear war has destroyed civilization. While nuclear war explains the lack of technology, it has some significant flaws. If the film is set so far into the future, Islam would have developed in that time period, possibly beyond what we recognize. Also, 10,000 years in a lamp is a remarkably long time. Genie likely would have forgotten who those celebrities are after millennia spent alone. A better explanation is that Genie is omnitemporal, meaning he can see into the past and future. Genie references that indoor plumbing will be huge. Speaking in the future tense suggests that Genie is able to see into the future, meaning Aladdin is set in the past. Additionally, all of the Disney Renaissance films have source material, whether that's a fairy tale, myth, or real-world history. Most are set around the time their source material was written, so Aladdin, being set far in the future, would be a huge exception. As a result, Aladdin is likely set in 750 AD, despite the continuity issues and fan theory arguing. Mulan, 1400s. Placing Mulan seems simple. It features the Huns attacking China, a real-world historical event. But, much like Aladdin, Mulan is struggling with continuity. Its depiction of Chinese culture borrows elements from multiple time periods. It uses Han Dynasty clothing, Sui Dynasty fireworks, and features the Huns from the Qin and Han dynasties. The Han Dynasty lasted from 206 BC to 220 AD. During this period, women wore short jackets with a long skirt, as Mulan does before posing as Ping. Mulan's mother and grandmother are also wearing this style, as is the matchmaker. In the Han Dynasty, men wore a short jacket, trousers in the style of a calf's nose with a short cloth skirt outside. The best example of this is Shifu, because he wears only this, never wearing armor. Mulan's companions Yao, Ling, and Qian Po also wear this style. However, the fireworks would not be invented until centuries later. It's disputed when fireworks were invented, but many believe they were developed during the Sui Dynasty. The Sui Dynasty went from 581 AD to 618 AD, and because Mulan shoots fireworks to cause an avalanche, the film could take place during this time period. The film also contains the Huns as the antagonist.
Nice work, gentlemen. You found the Hun army.
The Huns attacked during the Qin and Han dynasties. The Qin dynasty lasted from 221 to 207 BC, many centuries before there were fireworks. If Mulan was set in the Qin dynasty, then fireworks and Han-style clothing would not exist yet. The film could not be set here even if the Huns existed then. The Han dynasty is a compelling argument, explaining the clothing in the Huns, but not the fireworks. Also, Mulan is based on the Ballad of Mulan, a folk song originating during the Northern and Southern dynasties between 420 and 589 AD. It is possible Mulan was a living person, but the consensus is that her story is fictional. It can be argued that Mulan is set during the Northern and Southern dynasties because most Disney Renaissance films are set around their source material. However, there is one crucial location that disputes this: the Forbidden City. The Forbidden City is an iconic Chinese landmark and the setting for Mulan's finale. Emperor Chengzu of the Ming Dynasty ordered China's capital city to change from Nanjing to Beijing. The Forbidden City was built to commemorate this. Construction began in 1406 and took over 1 million workers 14 years. So for Mulan to defeat Shen Yu atop of the Forbidden City, Mulan must be set after 1420. Considering the climax is in the Forbidden City, makes this detail crucial to placing Mulan. Not only is the final battle in the Forbidden City, the Forbidden City is important to the plot. Seeing Mulan, Yao, Ling, and Qian Po scour the rooftops and battle the Huns on top of the Forbidden City shows that its inclusion is deliberate. It isn't just a background location or part of a short sequence like A Whole New World. While there is solid evidence for Mulan to happen during the Han Dynasty or even Sui Dynasty, the importance of the Forbidden City outweighs this. It can be considered set in the 1400s, with the clothing and Huns being continuity errors. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1482. This is the easiest Disney Renaissance film to place on a timeline. It opens in 1482 and shows the 1482 Festival of Fools. This is where Quasimodo was voted the Pope of Fools for being the ugliest in Paris. The film even gives a date. During Topsy-Turvy, Kloppin remarks that the date is the 6th of January, meaning the story takes place during and after. The source material, Victor Hugo's novel, also takes place on the 6th of January. Even though the film is set in 1482, Hugo's novel wasn't published until 1831. This is a rare case where a Disney Renaissance film is set when its source material is set, not when its source material was published. However, the 6th of January can be disputed by one detail. There is no sign that it's winter. The lack of winter weather is likely a story decision. Most likely the weather needed to be clear for the Festival of Fools. If the festival was during harsh winter rains, people wouldn't attend, and their attendance was necessary for the scene. Also, Quasimodo's balcony view during Out There would not be so picturesque on a gloomy day. Such a precise date, it's easy to confirm its setting. Despite concrete evidence of its time period, the Hunchback of Notre Dame contains many continuity errors. Many of these stem from French architecture shown in the film. During Out There, Quasimodo climbs onto the large spire on the roof of Notre Dame Cathedral. That spire wasn't added until the 19th century, 400 years later. In modern times, the statues outside of Notre Dame Cathedral are plain stone. They are depicted the same way in the film, although in the story's time period, they were polychromed. Another historical error is when Quasimodo and Esmeralda are on the roof of Notre Dame Cathedral. A piece of the roof breaks off and slides with the pair standing on it. The piece of material sparks while sliding. In the 15th century, this material would likely be lead, with copper as the next most likely substance, and neither of these would spark while sliding as shown. Despite a few historical issues, the Hunchback of Notre Dame has a definite time period, the 6th of January 1482. Pocahontas, 1607. The events of Pocahontas are based on a real expedition conducted by the British. In the real world, colonists arrived on Native American soil in 1607. This indicates Pocahontas is set in the same year. Being a film based on real events, Pocahontas pays attention to its historical accuracy. Characters like Pocahontas, John Smith, Governor Ratcliffe, Chief Powhatan, and Kocoum are all historical figures. The film released on June 23, 1995, to celebrate the 400th anniversary of the real Pocahontas' birth. By connecting directly to real-world events, real-world dates can be used to examine when Pocahontas is set. As a result, Pocahontas transpires in 1607. However, there are several other differences between the film and real-world events. Many of these are story changes rather than continuity issues. For instance, Pocahontas' age. Disney is no stranger for romance between its lead characters. Other Renaissance films include this trope as well. The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and Hercules all center around love. Allowing Pocahontas to have an on-screen romance with John, they had to make Pocahontas a little bit older. In real life, Pocahontas was 11 and John Smith was 27. Understandably, there was no romance. Another difference is where Pocahontas and John Smith met.
We'll show your people how to use this land properly.
In the film, they met near a waterfall, but in real life, Pocahontas saved Smith from death when he was caught and brought to her village. Also, the film shows the pair meeting after the settlers arrive on shore. In real life, the settlers had been around for months prior to any interaction with Pocahontas. This can be considered a continuity error, but it's likely a change to surprise audiences. Basing a film on historical events can be predictable and ruin the suspense, so creative liberties were taken to keep the audience engaged. Some characters in the film are also different from their real-world counterparts. The real Governor Ratcliffe led the settlement like in the film, but wasn't the villain. In 1609, when the colony was low on food, he sought help from Chief Powhatan. Instead, he was tortured and killed, different to the maniacal leader of the film. Kocoum was also different. In the film, Pocahontas avoids marrying him, but she married him in real life. It suggested this was by choice, because she was the chief's daughter and would have had the choice of whom to marry. Despite this marriage, she married an Englishman later in life. A great mystery of Pocahontas' life. Other story elements are historically accurate. Pocahontas' family situation was the same. Chief Powhatan was really Pocahontas' father, and her birth mother was not around anymore. And the British landed with the intention of finding gold. But this mission failed. But they discovered tobacco, allowing the settlement to grow and thrive. The film takes place in Senecomica, homeland of the Powhatan tribe. This is modern-day Virginia, encompassing Tidewater, Virginia, and sections of the Eastern Shore. Despite this, the film has a moose. Moose are often seen in the northern states, but not in Virginia. Another era is the United Kingdom flag displayed by Governor Ratcliffe. The movie takes place in 1607 and displays the current flag. This flag was not created until 1801, with the unification of Great Britain and Ireland, making its appearance historically incorrect. Real-world history establishes that Pocahontas is set in 1607, despite some story changes and errors within the film. The Lion King, unknown. The Lion King is difficult to place. It contains entirely animals, so using clothing, architecture, or technology is impossible. The only potential evidence for placing it isn't even from The Lion King. In Hercules, Scar appears as a throw rug, indicating The Lion King might be set in ancient times. There are multiple issues with this. Using evidence from one Disney Renaissance film to place another is flimsy, because it doesn't use evidence from the film in question. Also, Scar's cameo in Hercules is likely a reference to real-world events. Both Scar and Hercules were animated by the same man, Andreas Deha. Including Scar in Hercules is paying homage to Deha's previous work. Scar's role in Hercules could also be explained as an in-joke within The Lion King. After Mufasa's initial confrontation with Scar for missing Simba's ceremony, Zazu jokes that Scar would make a nice throw rug.
He'd make a very handsome throw rug. Zazu.
Seeing Scar as a rug can be explained as a reference to this line, not any serious indication of when The Lion King is set. Similar references occur across the Disney Renaissance, regardless of time period. Belle has a cameo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, even though Beauty and the Beast takes place centuries later. Scar's appearance in Hercules is an Easter egg rather than establishing the Lion King setting. Furthermore, Hercules showing Scar might not be referencing the Lion King at all, but something else. In Greek mythology, Hercules had to perform 12 labors to prove himself. The first of these was slaying the Nemean lion, whose skin Hercules wore so that his head peeked through its jaw. Scar appearing in Hercules might not indicate that the Lion King happens before Hercules, but instead reference this myth. The Lion King has issues regarding where it's set as well as when. The setting resembles the African savanna. Zazu mentions Africa during I Just Can't Wait to Be King. The Circle of Life and Hakuna Matata are in Swahili, which is spoken in East Africa, particularly in Kenya and Tanzania. The producers conducted research for the film in Kenya, indicating that Pride Rock and surrounding landscapes are in Kenya. However, there are some animals in the film that are not from Kenya. Timon is a meerkat, which is found in parts of Namibia and across South Africa. Also, the opening sequence shows leafcutter ants that are only found in South America. Despite some anomalies with its setting, The Lion King can be deduced to be in Kenya. When it takes place, however, is inconclusive. The only piece of evidence for when The Lion King is set is a lack of evidence. There is no human intervention, meaning humans in the area have not industrialized. Pride Rock might be in some uninhabited part of Kenya, but given the Earth's rising population, it is better explained as being pre-industrial. As a result, The Lion King is being placed here on the timeline, but no strong argument can be made for any time period. Beauty and the Beast, 1790s. The tale as old as time is set in France during the 1790s. The first piece of evidence for this is fashion. Gaston and Beast both wear tailcoats, which were popular in the 1790s. Female fashion also matches the late 18th century. Belle's dresses in the film, except a yellow ball gown, are thin. The girls that admire Gaston also wear thin dresses. This thin style of dress faded out by the 1800s, when ladies preferred big poofy dresses like Belle's ball gown. Beauty and the Beast must be set in the 1790s before this change happened. Maurice's inventions also match this time period. Early in the film, Maurice is shown inventing a steam-powered engine. Steam-powered engines were invented in the early 1700s, which seems ill-fitting for Maurice to invent it in the 1790s. However, steam-powered engines were only used in factories until the 1800s. Living in a provincial town, Maurice likely would have not seen a steam-powered engine. He may have invented one without the knowledge they already existed, meaning this detail doesn't challenge the 1790s time period. The main counter-argument to Beauty and the Beast happening in the 1790s is the French Revolution. The French Revolution lasted from 1789 to 1799 and redefined the power structure of French society. Part of this was the abolishment and execution of the French monarchy in 1792. Beast is established to be a monarch. He's referred to as a prince, has staff, and lives in a castle. For Beast to be a monarch, the obvious conclusion is that Beauty and the Beast takes place before the French Revolution. However, Beauty and the Beast takes place during the French Revolution, but Beast has been spared from execution. Beast is isolated, having locked himself away in his castle for years. As a result, the townspeople likely don't know he's still alive. His castle's hidden in the countryside. Both Maurice and Belle stumble across his castle, indicating that they didn't know it was there. All of Beast's staff live on the premises, so the townspeople would never see a staff member travel between the town and the castle. Beast's isolation likely saved his life because the townspeople were unaware of his existence. Beast has no influence over the townspeople's lives. During Belle, there are no signs that the townspeople are in a monarchy. Nobody's collecting taxes or announcing royal decrees. The most likely explanation is that Beast's parents were really king and queen and acted as French leaders did, collecting taxes and creating laws. After the curse, Beast became leader and withdrew from society. He stopped being involved in the town's affairs, and over time, its residents assumed he had died in isolation. Then the French Revolution happened. Unlike King Louis XVI, Beast was assumed dead already. Even if the townspeople knew he was surviving in exile, they had no motive to kill him because he was not interfering in their lives. The biggest piece of evidence for this is in the finale. Gaston gathers the townspeople and they mount an assault on the castle.
We'll rid the village of this beast!
If Beauty and the Beast took place before the French Revolution, the monarchy would have been very powerful. Townspeople would not storm the castle because they risked execution or imprisonment. For an attack on the castle to be launched, the monarchy must have no power, and thus, the French Revolution has already happened. Like all Disney Renaissance films, Beauty and the Beast can't get that continuity right. The Eiffel Tower is shown during Be Our Guest, but it was built in 1889, a full century later. Also during Be Our Guest, Lumiere uses matches when matches were not invented until 1826. These are not enough to support a fan theory and are simply labeled continuity errors to the 1790s setting. The Little Mermaid, 1890s. Ariel's journey has plenty of clues as to its time period, particularly the parts that happen on land. The first major clue is in Ariel's treasure room. Among the treasure in part of your world is a music box. It appears again when King Triton destroys Ariel's treasures. The music box was invented in 1770, meaning the film must be after 1770. The source material for The Little Mermaid supports this claim. It's based on the 1836 fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen. Andersen's other works include The Emperor's New Clothes, The Snow Queen, The Ugly Duckling, and Thumbelina. The source's material's publication year being in the 1830s provides a strong lead for the film's setting. It matches the architecture shown during Ariel's tour of Eric's village. During this tour, we can see gas lamps in public spaces, a trend that didn't start until 1809, and Eric's ship also confirms 1800s. It's a galleon, which can be determined from its bent U-shape and bulky stern. Galleons were invented to be cargo ships, but in the early 1800s, they started being used as auxiliary warships. The galleon dominated naval warfare during the 1800s. Eric's use of it for expeditions rather than transporting cargo indicates The Little Mermaid is set during the 1800s. Further evidence narrows it down further. Ariel sleeps in a nightgown with frills and lace. Prior to the mid-1800s, nightgowns were plain white with no decorations. So for Ariel's to be pink and decorated, The Little Mermaid must be set during or after the 1850s. Another piece of fashion to narrow it down is Ariel's wedding dress. Ariel's wedding dress is white, a huge indication of time period. Prior to 1840, wedding dresses were not a consistent color. Brides from wealthy families wore a variety of colors, and brides from poor families married in ordinary clothes. The white wedding tradition began with Queen Victoria's marriage in 1840. Queen Victoria wore white, a statement among rich families because it means they could afford to keep white clothes clean. After Queen Victoria married in white, white wedding dresses became a status symbol. So The Little Mermaid is set after 1840 and likely the late 1800s because the white wedding dress trend took time to become popular. The final piece of evidence for the film's time period is Scuttle's pipe. The Snarfblatt, as Scuttle calls it, is a calabash tobacco pipe that was invented in the 1890s. As with all Disney Renaissance films, The Little Mermaid, you guessed it, continuity errors. The blue dress Ariel wears in Kiss the Girl would not be considered appropriate in the Victorian era because it shows her ankles. Her pink corset is also not time period accurate. It has different interconnected skirts, which were not a trend of the 1800s because of how difficult they were to make. Another continuity issue is to do with geography. It is widely believed that The Little Mermaid takes place in Denmark. Hans Christian Andersen lived in Denmark. Both Ariel and Vanessa's weddings are held on a ship. The tradition of holding a wedding on the sea originates from the Vikings, a group that also lived in Denmark. In The Little Mermaid 2: Return to the Sea, Melody meets a penguin and a walrus, indicating that Eric's kingdom is close to the Arctic Circle. This all combines to show that The Little Mermaid is set in, you guessed it, Denmark. However, there is a fan theory otherwise. When Ariel and Eric leave the palace in a horse-drawn carriage, there are palm trees beside the drawbridge. Palm trees are not native to Denmark, spawning a popular fan theory that this isn't a continuity error. Some believe that The Little Mermaid is set in the Caribbean, and the palm trees are a hint at the film's true setting. If the film takes place on Caribbean islands, that makes Eric a Spanish prince of a colony. This fan theory explains plenty about the film as well. Eric's ship is a galleon, which was developed from 15th century Portuguese carracks. The Portuguese are strongly connected to the Spanish, meaning Eric could be Spanish. The Caribbean islands are surrounded by water, explaining the shipwreck Ariel searches at the beginning of the film. It also explains why Eric spends so much time at sea, because he needs to travel between the colony and his homeland, as well as between islands. The Caribbean also has bayous like the one shown in Kiss the Girl, further supporting the theory. The Little Mermaid is undeniably set in the late 1800s in either Denmark or the Caribbean. The Rescuers Down Under, 1890s. This 1990 animated feature is unique among the Disney Renaissance. The Disney Renaissance is known for its heartfelt animated musicals like The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast. The Rescuers Down Under does not fit this description. It is the only Disney Renaissance film to not contain any musical numbers. It is also the only Disney Renaissance film that is not an original property. Instead, it's a sequel to The Rescuers, which was released in 1977. This is not just an oddity for the Disney Renaissance, but Disney as a whole. When The Rescuers Down Under was released in 1990, it was the very first Disney sequel. To this day, The Rescuers Down Under is one of 4 sequels to get a theatrical release. The others are Fantasia 2000, Ralph Breaks the Internet, and Frozen 2. Being Disney's first sequel, the original is an important part of its story and setting. As a result, this timeline will be using The Rescuers to determine when The Rescuers Down Under is set.
No more Mr. Nice Guy.
Mice have a lifespan of 12 to 18 months, so the event of the sequel must occur shortly after the original. There is plenty of evidence in The Rescuers that the film is set in Victorian times. The Victorian era lasted from 1837 to 1901, and The Little Mermaid is also set in this time period. The first piece of evidence for this is clothing. In The Rescuers, we see humans at the UN dressed in broadcloth vests and long overcoats. Both of these styles are popular for men in the Victorian era. Technology also matches. Steam-powered technology is an integral feature of the Victorian era. Penny's held captive on an abandoned riverboat that is steam-powered. And Penny's name is also a reference. In the beginning of The Rescuers, Penny writes a note, deposits it in a bottle, and sends it on its way, dropping it off the balcony of a riverboat. This is a reference of penny dreadfuls. In Victorian times, pieces of literature were available for a penny each. They were often violent crime stories and were called penny dreadfuls due to their price and gruesome contents. So Penny's name is a reference to Penny Dreadfuls. The Rescuers is also unique because of its source material. All other Disney Renaissance properties are based on myths, ancient stories, or old fables. The Rescuers is based on a book series by British author Marjorie Sharp. Sharp's series was published between 1959 and 1978, making it the most recently written source material of the Disney Renaissance. While this might establish an argument that The Rescuers is set during the 1970s, the clothing and technology negate this. Also, The Rescuers and The Rescuers Down Under have another piece of source material, the Sherlock Holmes stories by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Bianca and Bernard represent Sherlock Holmes and John Watson, and Madame Medusa represents James Moriarty. Bianca's crime-solving expertise and social awkwardness are fitting for Holmes. Bernard's more outgoing temperament matches Watson's. Madame Medusa's brutality and willingness to kidnap a child resemble Moriarty's nefarious deeds. The Sherlock Holmes stories are set during the Victorian and early Edwardian eras, with all the stories taking place between 1880 and 1914. As a result, The Rescuers is set in the late 1800s, and The Rescuers Down Under takes place within a year of the first film, so the late 1800s. Tarzan, 1911. Not only is Tarzan last on the timeline, but it was also the last of the Disney Renaissance. Tarzan was released in 1999 before the Disney post-Renaissance started. The Disney post-Renaissance was completely different to the Disney Renaissance. It only contained one musical, The Princess and the Frog. It also experimented with other forms of animation like the CGI in Dinosaur or the watercoloring in Lilo and Stitch. Disney was starting to shift their focus when Tarzan was produced, and it shows. The songs in Tarzan are not sung by characters. Instead, they're sung by Phil Collins. Disney then continued the style in 2003 with Brother Bear. Another element of Tarzan is its historical references. During Strangers Like Me, there's a slideshow celebrating features of the man-made world. These include the Statue of Liberty, the Benz motor car, and the Eiffel Tower. As stated, the Eiffel Tower was constructed in 1889, indicating the film takes place after. Strangers Like Me also depicts Halley's Comet, which was visible in 1911. It can be determined that the majority of the film takes place in 1911. This is similar to the time period of Tarzan's source material. The original book, Tarzan of the Apes, begins in 1888 and ends in 1906 when Tarzan is 18 years old. Ending in 1906 is very close to the Disney appropriation, which ends in 1911. The beginning of the Disney version is also around the same time as the original. Tarzan's parents are dressed in early 1890s clothing, particularly his mother. In the late 1800s, women's clothing became more practical and started adapting elements of menswear. This is largely because the bicycle's popularity encouraged women to wear less restrictive clothing in order to transport themselves. Jane's clothing is also less restrictive, aside from the yellow bustle gown. As a result, Tarzan must begin and end after women's fashion evolved to be less rigid. It likely starts in the early 1890s and ends in 1911. As Tarzan of the Apes begins in 1888 and ends in 1906 and takes place over 18 years, Disney's Tarzan likely spans the same amount of time. For Tarzan to be 18 when the film ends, like he was in the book, Tarzan must open in 1893. Tarzan would not be a Disney Renaissance film without its historical errors. In the film, Clayton references having traveled to many countries, one of which is Zambia. But in 1911, Zambia did not exist yet. When Tarzan is set, a country called Rhodesia encompassed the landmass of modern Zambia and Zimbabwe. It was not until 1979 that Rhodesia was divided into modern-day Zambia and Zimbabwe, and Rhodesia stopped existing. Another historical issue in Tarzan comes from Professor Porter. When Professor Porter and Jane offer to take Tarzan to England with them, Professor Porter references meeting Charles Darwin, Queen Victoria, and Rudyard Kipling.
We really hope that you'll come with us.
Two of these figures would not be available to meet in 1911. Charles Darwin died in 1882 before the film's opening. Kipling was only starting to gain notoriety during this time because his early publishings were unsuccessful. Despite its errors, Tarzan is definitely set in the 1880s through 1911, making it last on the Disney Renaissance timeline. Alright guys, that is the timeline. What do you think? You agree with our timeline? Let us know in the comments below and make sure to binge our playlist for more Disney content. But most importantly, stay wicked.